The questions that got brought up in the exercise that Rachel and Michael led. I've fielded your questions. I've tried to kind of organize them by sort of if they were based upon from the first session or second session.
Oh, yeah.
Try to get them relatively in theme. Again, we may not get to all these, and we're going to do our very best. But if not, I promise we'll provide some kind of follow-up in some way or another. All right, you guys ready to be on the hot seat? Grilled?
Ready to roll up.
And I have a lifeline with Gay if I need to.
And by the way, these are
Which, by the way, I
yes.
just want to say that Joey just changed like the course of our marital conflict, like for future. Because he's like, why don't you just have do not disturb and only your number goes through?
That's good.
And so we're gonna make that change where my number is gonna go through.
Who's
so
Joey?
Joey is going to help my husband. He's gonna set up his phone before we leave today.
Oh, thank you, man.
And then we will have much
That's right,
less
yeah.
conflict about the phone.
That's great. Yes.
Do you want to just keep it?
Sure.
Yeah, just keep yours. All right, very good. All right, here we go. Again, thank you everybody for your questions. All right, first question to discuss. Blackstone's, can your attachment style, so we're talking about the 4 attachment styles, can it actually change over the course of your marriage? Can your attachment style change over the course of your marriage?
Yes, I think your attachment style can change. I believe that you may always have somewhat of a tendency because those early imprints are so familiar and so formative. However, I would say that I have noticed very slow, and they might be like watching a plant grow, changes towards a more secure attachment over time. I think the more reparative experiences we have of kind of trust, of being understood and heard, or even when we were talking about Michael saying, hey, I don't have the emotional capacity to talk about this today, but I'll bring it back around. Like even that, like my own kind of trust in a man and my own sense that the world is safe and that I belong, I feel like is converting both spiritually because of a lot of work of kind of understanding particularly God's love for me over time, but within the context of our marriage, it's like every time that we have a reparative experience, it is a slow adaptive change, I think, towards more of a secure attachment.
The only thing I would add to that is even just thinking in the beginning of our marriage, this is more personality. Like she's definitely more extroverted. I'm more introverted. And I feel like over time, like you've kind of appreciated some more introverted space and I've opened into more extroverted space. So like, I feel like the ways that we relate even around our, social, like calendar and whatnot, it feels like it speaks to some of that shifting. And so I think that, yeah.
Well said. Appreciate it. All right, there were several questions kind of on this theme. Essentially, one spouse relates or attaches in one area and another spouse in a different. Do you have tips for, I'll just start with this question. Do you have tips for an avoidant person to handle conflict with an anxious person? So the example given, one likes to go right to the conflict, deal with it quickly. The other needs time or would like to take some time to process and think. Kind of how do you speak to those when there's very opposite kind of views of how to deal with conflict?
I think similar to what we had talked about a few minutes ago for the avoidant, I can speak for the avoidant, is that it's okay if you need time. I just know that sometimes for me, when I say that, it's really I don't want to talk about it and I don't want to deal with it. And so I think that for the avoidant to be able to, how do I say this, to find energy in getting to connect to what's happening inside feels important so that you can So if you need time, away, making sure you're coming back is a big thing. But I think for me, in my experience, like I said earlier, like when Rachel would ask me how I was doing, and I'd be like, I'm fine. Like almost like there's a shutdownness in me. Now, like I feel like I really enjoy. It's not for Rachel. Like I'm not answering that question for Rachel now. Like I actually really enjoy getting to like have a witness to like what's happening inside of me, and that's been like healing and growth. But I think that comes from really believing that God made us relational beings that were designed to connect with Him, with ourselves, and with others, and like working that out. So if my big thing for the avoidant, if they ask for time away to kind of collect their thoughts, is that they follow up with engaging in the conversation and not leave it for the other person.
And the anxious, I think, kind of on the contrary, is actually looking at what's happening on inside of yourself. It was almost intolerable for me early on if Michael said, I don't have the capacity to talk to you about this right now. I would be like, game on, we're doing this now, like sit down, until I realized that because he wasn't giving me the attention that I deserve and that I'm worthy of, and that it wasn't reparative, it would just escalate and be worse than where it started and not a reparative experience. So what I've had to actually deal with is like a little girl that actually feels really abandoned and scared, and actually have had to learn a lot more kind of self-soothing and soothing with God, because if he's waiting to the next day, I have to decide how I'm going to get through, like how I'm going to go to sleep that night. And that's been really, like, sometimes that has involved calling a friend, praying, getting under my like weighted blanket and crying and listening to a worship song, just being curious, journaling. But it has really involved, like, because I've always regulated in other people, I've had to look more towards self.
Excellent. The beginning of the session one, there was kind of the discussion of understanding your stories. So someone asked, what types of questions would be helpful in inviting and drawing out your spouse's story, and then also in sharing your own?
Feel free to chime in. The one that just jumps out at me is a great question, is how were you comforted as a kid? And
this comes from Kay and Milan Yurkovich in the How We Love. Their material is so helpful.
And it's not as much like how were you comforted when you had a scraped knee. It's not as much about the physical, but like how were you comforted when you were upset about something or feeling anxious about something. And that's always really telling, because then you're getting to discover, like, tell me, like, how did your mom handle emotions? Like, how did your dad deal with, anger? And like you're beginning to paint a picture of the backdrop of your story. And so I really like that question of like, how are you comforted that they recommend? Anything else?
I mean, I think that, your spouse is a mine of particular stories too. And there's so many stories in Michael's life that I've never even heard, and that different times, like, I think even when I'm like, something happened with our 5th grade daughter being rejected at school, and it's reminding me of this time that this thing happened, at school. And so I think offering your story can be really important, and then just like being curious about like, okay, what was your 5th grade experience? What were summers like? That's been really big for us recently, is thinking about summers. Michael has a lot of summers being very lonely growing up in his family, and I have like a lot of memories of summer being kind of like very full. And so like, he might feel kind of sad going into summer, and I'm like energized for like some party over the summer. So it's just, I think there's so much to be mindful about one another's experiences.
A real practical piece, I think it's To Be Told, Dan Allender's To Be Told book and workbook. It's all about getting to know your story. I mean, it's very extensive, but it could be a resource for those of you who are wanting to kind of take a deep dive in, like, how do I engage my story? That could be a good resource for you. Dan Allender, To Be Told.
Excellent. Great. All right. On the theme of vulnerability, kind of got two questions here. We'll start with the first one. Just when you're trying to be vulnerable with your spouse, the question is, how vulnerable is too vulnerable? How do you kind of set appropriate boundaries in terms of what does it mean to be vulnerable?
Oh, I do. I'm obviously so curious about like the particular context, but we can try to answer that.
I think the question for me is not necessarily in the idea of to be too vulnerable, but like how much of your story can be honored by the other person. And so if you're at a very difficult point in your marriage, or if there's not a lot of trust built, it may not be the time to share something very intimately that, I mean, there's been seasons of our marriage that have been more difficult that I would be like, oh, it would not really honor me to be as vulnerable with you, as you maybe weren't in a position to like really be able to care for me well or hear from me. And so I do think that that's a really good question.
Yeah, and I'm even just thinking about like a big piece of my work is with men who are dealing with sexual brokenness issues. And so whether it be like pornography or infidelity or whatnot. And so in that realm, it actually can be very harmful if like you're just constantly telling your wife like, hey, I looked at pornography this week, and you're actually not doing anything about it, like doing work, or you have other other brothers who are like walking with you in it. And so I feel like that could be like an example too of like there's an important piece of getting like revealing that part, but I think there's nuanced ways that can be hurtful and harmful and unnecessary. But there's also ways in which not telling harder parts of our story is really about self-protecting. And so it just feels like it requires, I think, a lot of wisdom, grace, probably trial and error. But
in the area of sexual intimacy or sexual trauma, that was another question that got brought up. I'll go to that one. What if one or both spouses have baggage in the area of sexuality or even past trauma? How might the couple step into that conversation and moving towards healing?
Such a tender question. And I mean, at one level, we all come to marriage sexually broken in some form or fashion. And Rachel and I certainly have walked roads there and continue to walk that out as a couple. My hunch, my gut, and Rachel, you can tell me what you think, but like if you're new to that, or if that's new terrain, or if you find that you're just getting stuck and like you can't hear about some part of the story or of your spouse's story, it really might be beneficial to have a third party, like a counselor, to be able to kind of walk with you and just begin to even understand for yourself what's happened in your own story, so that you can like share it. Because like the one thing you don't want to do is just like dump, like that can be really harmful. But like you want to be known, but being able to like do that with wisdom, I think is going to take a lot of delicacy.
Yeah, I would say similarly, like it's just really sacred terrain, and so walking on it slowly and with much care and much time, and really could be really helpful to have a counselor as well.
I know that when we are talking about something that's going to be potentially triggering for the other person, like we have learned to be like, hey, I have something like that I want to share, but before we even talk about it, like almost like trying to figure out where are we at? Like, are you at a good place to hear? Like, can we talk? Can we talk about that? And then it kind of requires us to be like, oh, I don't know. Like, I'm curious about what you have to share, but I think that is almost like this conversation of like attunement to each other in where they are, But I just think that takes a lot of sensitivity. It's a great question.
All right, two questions, kind of similar in nature, so I'll sort of ask them together. Dealing with conflict from maybe not necessarily directly because of the conflicts between the two of you. So there was a question about engaging with in-laws or family members who have like widely varying levels of conflict and attachment style, or just a lot of external factors that are going on. Maybe it's not everything's fine at home, but there's these other things happening in life. Would you speak to kind of how do spouses like engage well with one another and move forward when there's these other things outside of the family unit that are going on?
I'm going to take this one.
Sure, I can take a stab. I guess it's a little bit hard for me because I think it impacts what's happening out there. I think the question would be like, how is it impacting me? So like there have been many times when like we have been with like Rachel's family, and I can just kind of like veg out, chill out, and just kind of be so unaware of her, and she feels like, hey, where did you go? Like, my dad said, did you hear my dad say that like rude comment? And like I was just not really present, and so I guess that's more the question of like what's happening within us. But I guess my only answer, or my only thought there is like getting to know like how is it stirring you, and then getting to like get to share that.
Yeah, I've often had this picture of us like together in the bow of a ship where there's like really rocky waters, because sometimes life just feels like that, and I'm like, am I safe with you? Like, are we in some kind of place where we're together in this? And that requires a lot of, like, less important to me at that moment is like kind of what happened with us in response to my in-laws or his in-laws or this situation at school. We've had situations where we need to advocate for something like our child's health. I'm like, oh, like I really desire for you to move into this, like I know that you might feel some avoidancy here, but I carry it alone if you don't move in. So it just feels like most of those things have this micro like narrative of the two of us and like how we're managing it internally.
Yeah, that's a really good, helpful picture, Rachel. Thank you. All right. The big kind of based, I think this question is kind of framed from the exercise you guys did together. What advice or wisdom might you have in dealing with sort of those historical issues or just conflicts from deep in the past that continue to come up when you're actually talking and dealing with something else in the present that would create the conflict to be more major than it maybe normally ought to be otherwise?
Right. One of the things that we say a lot is like, there's no need to go to the past if the past isn't present. But if the past keeps coming up in the present, it's an indicator that there needs to be some more work. So it's not like we're just trying to hold on to things, but if it's still kind of coming up in an example that it shouldn't come up in, or it feels bigger, then it just says, oh yeah, this is a wound. And like one of the things that has been really helpful for us is to kind of picture this as like a diamond, like maybe the sense of like I feel rejected, and or you feel alone, and like for it to externalize it, like in the moment of like, oh yeah, this wound in our relationship has history, and almost just like looking at that as like, yeah, that's true, like honoring it like in the moment, like a diamond, and being able to kind of look at like all the different like facets of it, but just even the idea of like, yeah, that's there, not in a way that's like I'm gonna like bang, like make you feel like guilty about what you did or how you keep doing this, but more of like, this is a wound, and you have to be able to do that. You have to come from the posture of like, I've been hurt, like those I statements, right? Of like, oh, this is here in me, and just to name that feels really vital, to begin to like look at it. And like our big thing is to forgiveness doesn't mean you can't still be hurt by something. Like there's an act of forgiveness, like I forgive you for saying this or for doing this, but there still can be, one of the questions that we love, instead of saying I'm sorry, just saying I'm sorry, like is asking like, how has that hurt you? It's kind of what we did in the 3 minutes, is like, tell me how that hurt you. So even if it's from 20 years ago or 5 years ago, like, and it is coming up, rather than saying, wow, you're always bringing that up, it might be because it hasn't been clearly cleaned out or thoroughly cleaned out, and so.
Or the repair hasn't fully hit the body. Like, for example, a couple where the husband had an early experience of betrayal, and then the wife, they had come and there was forgiveness, but every time he went to the airport, her nervous system got really anxious and she got really scared. Well, she still needs a level of comfort and reassurance from him, like, okay, like I'm going to the airport, this is where I am, like, I totally understand. He might have to hear, it might be necessary for her to talk about all of those feelings again. And so, yeah, like trusting that there's a reason that this hasn't come to a full completion. And it may be that it happened 10 years ago and I've forgiven you here, but my body is still reacting. My body is still scared and I need more repair there.
We have 2 more questions. I kind of put a couple questions together that were similar, and then if we got time, we can open it up to anybody else. We'll try to get out of here at 1. What is an appropriate amount of, so regarding this exercise, what's an appropriate amount of time to wait or to feel ready to do the 3-minute exercise together? And then maybe what's too long to wait versus what's too soon to engage? And then a sub part of that is how about if one spouse feels ready and one doesn't? So kind of navigating the practical, how do we come together for the purpose of understanding one another?
I'm picturing like the window of tolerance in my mind here. So if like someone is like at a 9 or a 10, like fired up and angry, I would want that person to be able to like come down, because I mean literally your cognitive ability to like understand, reason, listen is going to be greatly impaired. And so like to me it's not as much about like you should wait this amount of time, because it depends on the conflict, how big the conflict is, and then where you're at in the window of tolerance. And so like if you're able, ideally a conflict is going to be, you're going to be able to work through the conflict when you're in the window of tolerance. And so if you're in hypoarousal, it's being responsible, intentional about like, okay, like I need to kind of step into this. Everything in me wants to kind of just go away, push it away and not deal with it. But like, I think getting into the timing to me feels most important, to be like in the window.
And sometimes it hasn't been very long after a conflict that we can do it. It just depends on our level of activation, whether it'll be somewhat successful. So.
Yeah, I think the bigger the conflict, probably the harder that would be. But for the more minor ones, it can happen right then.
Sometimes we wait to, we still go to marriage counseling, and sometimes we wait to see our marriage counselor for it. If it's a really big one, we're like, we're not even going to attempt this together because this is so loaded for us.
Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. All right, final question from the audience here. We talked about regulating and using other people at times to help regulate us in that window of tolerance. Do you recommend communicating with the same couple? So, for example, husband with the husband, wife with the other with the wife of the same. Do you find it just as helpful for a husband to share with a trusted friend than a wife to share with a different trusted friend? What's your counsel regarding sharing with others?
I think that could vary. Look for someone that is going to hold it confidential, that has the capacity to really honor what you share, and someone that's for the two of you. Certainly I have friends that they do get kind of like you all did, wow, that's not fair that Michael did that. They rally for me at some times, but ultimately they deeply love Michael and they are deeply for us. And so I don't know that it matters so much which couple, but just that you both feel like a level of comfort with who that is.
Because I think that would be wonderful if both the husband and wife feel connected and safe with the same couple, but that might not always be the case.
It's a rare gift if you do. That would be great.
That's a rare gift, but I agree. I don't think it has to be. But I love the idea of us. I just would love the church to be a place that we could just freely say we're struggling in our marriage, or we're struggling in whatever, and that it could be freely offered and received, because it's the gospel, right? Jesus came not for the people who have it together; he came for the sick,
Yeah. That's so good. I was going to say, too, that my best friend, Kathy, when I will call her, oftentimes she won't even talk about Michael at all. She'll say, Rachel, it sounds like that little girl is desperate for validation, and she wants it for Michael, and he's not giving it to you right now. So what do you want to do with that? So someone that really knows you well and knows your story, I think, would be really, really crucial.
Awesome. That's so great. Anybody else? Any questions from the floor?
Where do you recommend you guys do counseling, just with patients, where do you recommend reaching out for that? If it's something that is hey, we could see something out.
I've heard Redeemer Counseling Center is really good.
We're a little biased, but no, they're
there are so many good counselors in Central Florida, and so Drew or someone on the team can help you get connected if you felt like that would be a good step. Also, I really, like to be able to hold space with, I know that it wouldn't be intense counseling, but I know people who just meeting with their pastor and connecting over that can be really, really an important piece too. But yeah, there's a lot of good resources for counseling in the area.
When I send a follow-up email to everyone, thanking everyone for attending, I'll include some of those resources that are here locally.
Yeah. There was another question.
I was going to ask something. I'll ask you later. No, I think it's just how long is too long before you needed to count so everybody,
Yeah.
my husband has a very different parenting style.
Yes.
Back home for cup.
Yes.
Kind of thing, and it's hard. It is super hard, especially when you see your children going to one parent for one thing and one parent for the other, that kind of. So that's always constant turmoil between us, a lot.
Yes.
When is it too late? We got one kid out, one kid's still in, and I'm just when they're all gone, everything will be okay.
Yeah. Oh, I don't think it's ever too late. I think.
Sometimes I want to go why did we do this all the time?
And you bring up a good point of there's a reality that I think it's kind of God's sense of humor that in some ways, and then sometimes I want to be this is too hard. We're different. We see the world differently. There's good ways in which she sees the world through her beautiful feminine eyes, and I see the world through my masculine eyes. And how does the difference get to not be the source of friction, but a blessing and an honoring, and getting to we want the same thing. And so, I have people who are, their kids are grown and they're wanting to actually do the work of man, I feel like I could have done some things differently,
There's a saying that I say this to the kids: when we die and get all of our money inherited, it's going to all go to your psychologist.
That's right. Yeah. Your therapy fund.
And I've seen really brave empty nester parents that come back to their kids and they're like, "Hey, we're seeing this, and they're having these incredible conversations. I mean, I don't think that it's ever too late.
But if there's one spouse who's maybe wanting to go to counseling and one spouse who maybe feels more resistant, that can be a hard dynamic as well, so in that situation, I always encourage, well, start where you are. And so if you want to come in and then maybe through the process of seeing kind of what it's like, then your partner will be willing to come in and begin to talk through it. Because a lot of people just have what is counseling? I don't need it. And it's for the people who are really crazy. But the reality is it's everyone could benefit at some level, and so reducing some of the stigma of what that is can also be helpful. So
I was just going to ask, for you guys, since you've been married, beginning of RTS and then to now, what are ways that you have grown together spiritually? I mean, so many people are coming to you, taxing you're counseling so many other people, you're connecting with your church. What are just interesting to hear how different pastors, how do you, over time, even for me and Jesse, it's all right, we've got our kids, they're taxing us, and other people, it's so much time. How do we grow together spiritually?
yeah.
And then all of a sudden you see the fingers underneath the doors, It's 6 a.m. they're coming in, but what are ways that you guys have been able to keep that pillar strong in your life?
Yeah.
Being in God's Word, but not it's easier for us to do things, for me to read my Bible in a set time, and then her, because, we're juggling, babies,
Yeah.
separately.
It feels like the kind of the piece of scheduling time because of all the juggling. So for the intimacy is also can be creating time that we're getting to pray together, because prayer is just such a vulnerable piece. And so that might not happen there certainly can be just quick prayers or whatnot that we might be doing, but a more extended time. One of the metaphors that has been super helpful for us is, particularly I think for our work as counselors and just, I think for any of us is this image of Jesus and lifting ourselves up and out into the cross. So just this picture of all the things that we hold, all the sin in our heart, all the things that conflict, all the stories we hear, with friends or with our clients, just this image of releasing that together, to the cross, he's big, he's bigger. It has been releasing that has been really I think helpful for us.
Yeah, for sure. And we very practically will be whoever gets to wash the dishes also gets to listen to the podcast of the sermon. We're always hey, you get it tonight, I get it tonight. Yeah.
Anyone else? Well, very good. We just really want to thank you for making the effort to come out today. Willow Creek Church, we love you, and we're for you. And this is a tool, right? I mean, I want to give you guys the final word, but just this is not meant to be kind of all right, this is going to cure all that ails you. Instead, really, the work begins now. and our prayer and encouragement would be to have honest, real conversations based upon today. And Pastor Greg, myself are available as well to be here. Well, I'm available. Pastor we're here for you in any capacity. Blackstones, do you want to give any kind of closing charge, encouragement, anything?
I'll say a thank you if you have a charge. I just want to say, my heart is leaving so encouraged. I didn't know that you all would have so many questions and so much energy and even just giving up your Saturday morning, and it's just been really beautiful. I'm so encouraged by your faces and your stories, so thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm particularly thinking of the person or couple who feels hopeless or feels like skeptical or like this, this is great, but like this isn't, it's not going to change. Just that I think Jesus sees you and sees like your heart, and to continue to open yourself to him. I think marriage is just a picture. Like this is just a picture of something so much more, which is the ultimate marriage feast of the Lamb that we all, like, in all of its innocence and all of the way it was supposed to be, like, that Jesus holds, like, the glory, the goodness of marriage, and he also realizes it's not the way it's supposed to be. Like, we're fallen and we're broken, and there's real loneliness. And so I think for the person or the couple who feels that, just to encourage you to like lean in to Jesus and your community, that there's a means of grace to help in whatever situation you find yourself in. So, yeah, absolutely. Oh, Father, we thank you that you have created marriage to be this great mystery. And it is a mystery, as it says, as Paul says in Ephesians, of Christ and the church. And so there's no 1 step, 2 step, 3 step that will help solve that mystery. But it's also a mystery that you invite us into, that as we move into the stories of our spouses, as we move into our own stories, that somehow you show up and your perfect love actually gets to be radiated and seen more visibly. And so thank you for the gift of marriage, and for the ways in which you bring a couple together to work out our sanctification, to work out our salvation. And so we just ask for each couple here, particularly as they leave and in this next day, just guard from any attack from the enemy, any way that the enemy, who does not want connection, who does not want a marriage to flourish, would you guard against any accusation that would be not from you. And those things that we have said that need to stay and to stick with the couple, Lord, we pray that you would just highlight that, strengthen that, and that this would be a step towards more connection and more intimacy. So we thank you for being who you are. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for the great repair in the cross, and that through the cross and through your Son's love, we get to be in communion with you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Can we give one more round of applause to the Blacksons? Thank you guys so much. Sincerely. All right. We hope you have a wonderful day.